Hey everyone, welcome to the Life of Sassy and welcome to What's for Dinner. Here's what we had for dinner this week. Here is what I need to make the sauce for my Eggroll Stir Fry. First we have soya sauce, oyster sauce, sesame oil, brown sugar, ground black pepper, a garlic clove, and some fresh ginger. I store mine in the freezer to help it last longer. I make the sauce for my egg roll stir fry right in the measuring cup. There's no need to dirty additional dishes. Here I'm adding 1/4 cup of soya sauce. I always use the low sodium. I've tried using regular, but this dish becomes really salty. Then I'm going to add in 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. I'm using light brown sugar, but I'm sure dark brown sugar would be really great in this recipe. For the sesame oil, I add just under a tablespoon. You don't want to overpower it with the flavor of the sesame oil. Then it's 2 tablespoons of oyster sauce. This one takes a little bit of patience to get it out of the bottle. Then I'm going to add a pinch of freshly ground black pepper. We do ours in a spice grinder. Now I just pulled my ginger from the freezer. I'm going to go ahead and grate it right in. You're looking for about 1 to 2 tablespoons. Fun fact, if you freeze your ginger, you can go ahead and finely grate it in, skin and all. Best trick I've ever learned. And the last thing to add to our sauce is 1 clove of garlic that I'm going to use the same grater to just grate right into my sauce. Now I just need to go ahead and whisk up my sauce. This sauce does take a little bit of whisking to incorporate the brown sugar, and if you're not using it immediately, I do recommend leaving the whisk in the sauce just so you can mix it up before you use it. The brown sugar will settle to the bottom. Here's everything I'm going to need to make the egg roll stir fry. I cut up all of the vegetables in my meal prep. Here I have celery, carrots, mushrooms, Napa cabbage, green onions, my sauce, which you just saw me make, and some ground pork. We buy our ground pork in the big packages, so we portion it out to per meal sizes and then freeze it. This recipe can be altered in so many ways. You can use any type of ground meat you want. I've done it with chicken and turkey. I've heard people do it with ground beef. I personally haven't tried that one yet. As well, if you don't want to take the time to cut up all the vegetables, you can use coleslaw mix or even some of the other mixes from the store. Earlier this year, I was having a lot of trouble getting Napa cabbage, so I actually ended up getting 2 broccoli slaws and using that. It was a little bit different, but still really good. Once we get this all together, it will be served over rice, so let's go ahead and get cooking. Here I have a pan I have heated over medium-low heat. I'm going to go ahead and just add in some vegetable oil. You want to use a neutral oil for this. I'm using one of the bigger skillets we have because cooking down the Napa cabbage, it's one of those things, it looks like a ton. Once it's cooked down, it'll be a lot less, but you just need room in the pan until it cooks down. And the first thing I'm going to add is my celery. I'm going to go ahead and let this saute for a couple of minutes, and then I'll go ahead and add my carrots. I like to do my veggies in stages because I like them all different doneness. I've let my celery cook down probably for about 2-3 minutes. It's just starting to soften. So now I'm going to go ahead and add my carrots. I have about 1/4 cup each of celery and carrots. Okay, I've let my carrots cook down for probably about another 3 minutes. They're starting to get a little bit soft, so I'm going to go ahead and add in my ground pork. And we're just going to go ahead and break it up. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to let this cook until the pork has been cooked through. My pork is now pretty much cooked all the way through. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my sauce. I leave the whisk in my sauce because I'm going to mix it up a little bit. I find the brown sugar resettles on the bottom. And I'm just going to pour in a couple of tablespoons to help season the pork. It smells so good. As soon as that ginger hits the heat, it's all you can smell, but it's so good. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add my mushrooms. I don't like my mushrooms completely cooked down, and actually the original recipe for this doesn't call for mushrooms, but I really like them in there. So I'm going to go ahead and add those now. Now I'm only going to let this cook for maybe 30 seconds, a minute, before I start adding in my cabbage, because like I said, I don't want the mushrooms cooked completely down. Okay, that looks good to me. I'm going to go ahead and start adding my cabbage. Down near the bottom, there were these really thick pieces. I'm going to add those in first because they're going to take a little bit longer to wilt down. Okay, I've got most of them in there. If there's a few little pieces in here, it doesn't really matter. But now I'm just going to go ahead and stir this up. And I want to let the cabbage wilt down. I'm probably going to let this cook for about 4 or 5 minutes. And then I'll add the rest of the cabbage in. Okay, I've gone ahead and I've let my cabbage start to saute down, and you can see that the volume has reduced. So now I'm going to go ahead and add the rest of my cabbage. And this is why you want a really big pan. And I still managed to knock some out. Okay, I'm just going to let this saute down again, probably about another 4 to 5 minutes. The cabbage has wilted down, so now the last thing I'm going to do before I add the sauce is I'm just going to dump in my green onions. These don't really need to cook. They'll cook while the sauce is cooking. Now I'm going to stir up my sauce. I'm going to add about half of it in, mix it around, then I'll add the other half. I just find it distributes a little bit better that way. Okay, I'm just going to let this cook for about 2 or 3 minutes with the sauce in there to let the sauce cook down a little bit and incorporate with everything, and then the stir fry part is done. The Eggroll Stir Fry is now done. I'm going to turn off the heat, plus I'm going to take this off the heat. And like I said, we're going to serve this over white rice. Once I have it plated up, I'll show you. Here's some white rice that I cooked up. I did mine in the oven. I love this method. It just works really well for us. I can make multiple batches at once. And here we have a serving of white rice in the bowl. And here I've gone ahead and I have topped the white rice with my Eggroll Stir Fry. This was not our first time making Eggroll Stir Fry. It's actually a favorite in our house. I have tweaked the recipe a little bit. I was going to post the original recipe below, but unfortunately it's no longer available, so I will type up the way I make the recipe in the description box below, but this recipe will remain on repeat in our house. Tonight for dinner we are going to have burgers with homemade potato wedges. Here's everything I'm going to use to season the wedges. I'm going to put about 2 to 3 tablespoons of olive oil, 1/8 of a teaspoon of smoked paprika, 1/8 to 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 1/8 of a teaspoon of black pepper, 1/8 of a teaspoon of chili powder, a teaspoon of onion powder, and 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder in this bowl. I'm going to mix it up with the potatoes once they're cut into wedges. Here are the potatoes I'm going to peel and cut into wedges, and here are my burger patties. When we buy our ground beef, we go ahead and make it into various meals and freeze it. So we went ahead and made homemade burger patties. We package them in tubes, sucker seal them and freeze them, so then when we want burgers, we just have to pull out the patties. I went ahead and peeled the potatoes. Now I've cut them into wedges. We always keep a towel in our kitchen to dry our vegetables on. I went ahead and I dried the wedges. It just helps them to get crispier in the oven. It takes off some of the starch that you build up from cutting. And now I'm going to go ahead and add them into my bowl with the olive oil and spice mixture. I went ahead and mixed up the potatoes, and now I'm just going to pour them onto my foil lined cookie sheet. And then you're going to spread them out into a single layer. I've preheated my oven to 375. I'm going to go ahead and pop these in. I'll let them cook for about 25-30 minutes. Then I'll come and flip them over and let them cook for another 20 to 25 minutes until they're nice and brown and crispy. Here are my burger patties just frying up on the stove. We just did them in a frying pan tonight. And here are my potato wedges cooking away, looking good, getting crisp. Here is dinner tonight. Here we have my wedges, my burger, and my German cucumber salad, which I will link how to make below. Tonight was just a classic burger and fries. This meal remains on repeat in our house. Sometimes we switch up the sides, but if you're interested in my German cucumber salad, check out the link below. I have a full video on how to make this. Here's everything I have to make my roasted sweet potatoes. I'm going to be using 2 sweet potatoes, some cinnamon, garlic powder, salt, pepper, Italian seasoning, olive oil, freshly grated Parmesan cheese, and some unsalted butter. The first thing I'm going to do is just go ahead and peel my sweet potatoes. Now that I have my sweet potato peeled, I'm going to go ahead and just cut off the ends, and then I want to cut them into fairly thin slices. But with that being said, I would do this using a knife, not a mandolin. A mandolin will make them too thin and they'll burn. So here, it's probably about, I'd say, 1/4 of an inch thick. That's perfect. I'm going to go ahead and just chop these up. This sweet potato, because it's so large, I went ahead and chopped it in half. I just put my other pieces off to the side, but I want them all to be roughly about the same size so they cook at the same time. So by cutting this in half, I'll achieve that. Here I have a cookie sheet that I just lined with some foil. I'm going to go ahead and spread these out. I want them to be in a single layer. And there we have it. I've now gone ahead and laid my sweet potatoes out in a single layer. You don't want any of them overlapping or else they'll steam instead of roast. To cook the sweet potatoes, I have my oven preheating to 375. I went ahead and melted about 1 tablespoon of butter. Mine's probably a little bit more. I had an open piece. I just melted it all. And then you want to go ahead and you want to add equal parts of olive oil. So I'm going to go ahead and pour in about 1 tablespoon of olive oil. I just eyeball this part. I don't actually measure it. And then I'm going to go ahead and I want to add just a pinch of black pepper, 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder. Then I just want to put in a pinch of cinnamon. My jar is pretty much out, so I'm going to dump it in. I'm only going to add, again, about 1/8 of a teaspoon. And then I want to add about 1/2 tablespoon of Italian seasoning. I didn't grab a measuring spoon, so I'm just going to eyeball it. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and just use a fork and mix this up. Okay, there we go. We're ready to go. Just because I'm working on this smaller counter, I'm going to go ahead and put all of this away, and then I will move on to the next step with the sweet potatoes. Now I'm going to go ahead and take my butter, olive oil, and all of my seasonings, and I'm just going to go ahead and brush it on all of my sweet potatoes. Now that I have the butter and olive oil mixture with the seasonings all over my sweet potatoes, I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle on some freshly grated Parmesan. We buy ours in the wedge from Costco and grate it ourselves. And there we go. You'll see I put on a very generous sprinkling of Parmesan, but that crisps up in the oven, and oh, these are so good. I could literally eat them like potato chips. So now I'm just going to wait for my oven to finish preheating, and then I'm going to pop these in. I'm going to start with 30 minutes and I'll see how that goes and go from there. My oven's now preheated, so I'm going to go ahead and pop these in. I'll check them after about 30 minutes and see if they need to go a little bit longer. I've pushed them off to the side because I'm also going to be putting my Brussels sprouts in here. Next, I'm going to be making some roasted Brussels sprouts. For this, I'm going to be using olive oil, garlic powder, onion powder, salt, pepper, freshly grated Parmesan, and these frozen baby Brussels sprouts. I'm going to go ahead and mix my Brussels sprouts in this bowl. So I'm just going to go ahead and add about 1 to 2 tablespoons of olive oil. I'm just eyeballing it. Then I'm going to go ahead and add about 1/8 of a teaspoon of freshly ground black pepper, the same 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, just under 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder, and the same amount of onion powder. And then I'm going to go ahead and mix this up. And to this bowl, I'm just going to add my baby Brussels sprouts. Now, I have to be honest, when Walmart says baby Brussels sprouts, they're not joking. Some of them are this small. But let's go ahead and add them in. Now I'm going to go ahead and mix these up to coat them in the olive oil. Once they're well coated, I'm going to go ahead and take my Parmesan cheese. I'm just going to eyeball it, but I'm looking to add probably about 2 tablespoons. And then you want to mix them up again and just make sure that they're really well coated. As you can see, all of the Brussels sprouts have Parmesan on them now. Last time I made these, I actually did them in the air fryer, but since everything else for tonight's dinner is going in the oven, I'm just going to go ahead and roast them off. I just have a cookie sheet here I lined with some foil, and I'm actually going to go ahead and just spray on some cooking spray. I just want to make sure that the Parmesan isn't going to stick to the pan, because that's the best part. I went ahead and put these out on my cookie sheet. They're going to go in the 375-degree oven with my sweet potatoes. And because there are some that are so small, I'm going to check them after 15 minutes. In total, I think it's going to take about 20 minutes for these to cook, but I'll let you know once they're done. Okay, now I'm just going ahead and adding my Brussels sprouts to my oven. And I'm going to check those in about 15 minutes. For my protein tonight, we had some leftover ham in our freezer. I just went ahead and pulled that out. I'm going to wrap it up in a foil bundle and just toss it in the oven with everything else to reheat for about 15 to 20 minutes. This was a full bone-in ham that has a honey mustard and brown sugar glaze on it. Here's my little foil packet of ham. I just put it on this little cookie sheet to make it easier to get in and out. But I'm going to go ahead and pop this in my oven. And I will check on everything in about 15 minutes. The sweet potatoes have been in for about 30 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and pull these out. I got a couple that got a little crispier than I would have liked, but these are good to go. The Brussels sprouts still need some time, so I'm going to put those back in. And I'll let those go probably for about another 5 minutes and check them again. Here is tonight's dinner when all was said and done. We have the roasted sweet potatoes, which are absolutely amazing. I love this recipe. I actually started making my butternut squash this way, and when there was no butternut squash left in the stores after the fall season, I moved to using the same recipe on sweet potatoes. The Brussels sprouts, I completely underestimated. These ended up taking almost 35 minutes in the oven, and they're a little less crisp than they were when I made them in the air fryer. And then the ham, quick, easy, heated up, and ready to go. Thank you for joining me for this week's What's for Dinner. And if you enjoyed this, please consider joining my YouTube family by clicking that subscribe button. If you enjoy all things food with a little bit of life thrown in, I hope you stop by again. Thanks again for watching, everyone.